Back in 2012, a young black man named Dwayne Lee Johnson took a job as a groundskeeper for a school district in California. His job? Spray weeds. Spraying a chemical, the chemical that the district handed him. The district told him it was safe to use without protective equipment. The chemical that has been used most widely as a herbicide on Earth for decades was Roundup. And the active ingredient in Roundup is glyphosate. And Dwayne sprayed it on the school grounds, hundreds of gallons of it, for 2.5 years. Then in 2015, the WHO, the World Health Organization, classified glyphosate as probably carcinogenic to humans. Probably causes cancer. And that same year, Dwayne Lee Johnson, then 42 years old, was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin lymphoma. He was given just a few years to live. In 2018, a California jury awarded Johnson $289 million from Monsanto, the company that made Roundup, because they failed to warn him that what he was spraying could give him the cancer that he now had. The jury saw internal Monsanto documents, the so-called Monsanto papers. They saw that the company had known for decades that glyphosate was probably carcinogenic. They had known that their own employees were getting sick, and they had funded fake studies, ghostwritten by Monsanto employees and published under the names of friendly academics, all to convince the EPA that it was safe. The jury, they ended up furious, giving Johnson $289 million. And the lawyer who put that case in front of a jury was a name you might recognize. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Yeah, Bobby Kennedy, the environmental lawyer in California at the time. He represented that dying groundskeeper and won. Johnson's verdict was reduced on appeal. It went down to $20.4 million, and he used some of that money to provide for his family. But that case, the Johnson case, opened the floodgates. Since then, Bayer, the German conglomerate that bought Monsanto for $63 billion, they're not exactly hurting for money, they've paid out more than $10 billion in Roundup verdicts and settlements. And the litigation, it's got more than 192,000 plaintiffs. 65,000 cases still pending. Back in February of this year, Bayer proposed another $7.25 billion settlement to get rid of the rest of the cases with an opt-out deadline. So the case is one of the largest mass tort proceedings in the history of American jurisprudence outside of tobacco and opioids. It's bigger than asbestos, bigger than DuPont. And yet this week, Trump's U.S. Supreme Court heard oral arguments in a case called Monsanto versus Durnell. The plaintiff, a man from Missouri, John Durnell, who sprayed Roundup, who got non-Hodgkin lymphoma. He won a $1.25 million judgment in Missouri State Court. The Missouri Appeals Court, it affirmed it, and Bayer appealed to the Supreme Court. And now the Supreme Court's hearing arguments. And Bayer, they're arguing that because the EPA approved the Roundup label, and the EPA didn't require them to put a cancer warning on the label, that no state court can hold them liable for failing to warn people about cancer. It's called federal preemption. And so look, if this Supreme Court rules for Bayer, it doesn't just gut John Durnell's case, it eliminates the legal pathway for tens of thousands of cancer patients to ever sue any pesticide manufacturer because they failed to warn them about anything, forever. The Bayer settlement of $7.25 billion, it's on the table specifically because Bayer is afraid that the court might rule against them. But if the court rules for them, Bayer keeps that $7 billion, and the doors close on all of these plaintiffs. And every other pesticide manufacturer in America gets a legal shield. But what I really want you to take away from this, RFK Jr., the lawyer who won Dwayne Lee Johnson's case, who's personally, on camera and in writing, has said multiple times that glyphosate causes cancer, who built his entire MAHA, the Make America Healthy Again brand, on the promise that he would clean up American food, ban toxic chemicals, and reform the EPA. He is the reason that plenty of moderate voters swung to Donald Trump in 2024. He's currently the Secretary of Health and Human Services right now in the Trump regime. He is the Chief Health Officer of the United States. And he said that glyphosate causes cancer. Yet Trump's Solicitor General filed a brief on Monsanto's side. The DOJ, which is supposed to represent you and me, the United States and her citizens, took Bayer's side. The Solicitor General asked for and was granted oral argument in front of the Supreme Court on Bayer's behalf. And that guy stood up and argued against the cancer victims. While on the steps of the Supreme Court just outside, the MAHA movement, the people who voted for Bobby Kennedy and then swung their votes to Trump, were holding a rally called People vs. Poison. The MAHA voter is now openly protesting the Trump administration they helped get elected. Watching the U.S. government argue against them in front of 9 justices using the very same arguments that their own movement was supposed to defeat, that is what they got for helping Trump get elected. I hope they're enjoying it. And how does all this happen? Just follow the money. That's all you have to do is follow the money. Bayer has spent millions in lobbying since the Roundup litigation started. The lobbying has been routed in part through a front group called Modern Ag Alliance, which is, per folks like the U.S. Right to Know and American Prospect, a Bayer public relations operation pretending to be a farmer advocacy group. They have spent more than $1 million spreading money out to politicians of both parties, pushing state-level laws that would shield pesticide manufacturers from these types of lawsuits. North Dakota, Georgia, Kentucky, they've already passed these shield laws at the state level. And in February, Donald Trump signed an executive order requiring expanded domestic glyphosate production for national security. National security so we can kill weeds. Months later, his Solicitor General is at the Supreme Court arguing on Bayer's behalf against MAHA voters. And those MAHA voters are on the steps protesting. And Bobby Kennedy is somewhere mutilating a raccoon. And I want to tell you something personal here, because this is the fight that Ring of Fire is used to. One of the lead law firms in all this litigation, the firm that's represented thousands of Roundup cancer patients, the firm that's been in trial after trial against Monsanto for years, is the firm that I share a building with, Levin Papantonio. That's the same Levin Papantonio that our friend Mike Papantonio is the founder of this very show, and he's a senior partner here. Pap and all of the attorneys here that I work with have been fighting this fight since before there was a Trump administration to fight. And they are going to be fighting it well after. So when I tell you that this lawsuit and this argument in front of the Supreme Court matters, I know. I know that the work will continue. I know that the fight will continue against this German agrochemical conglomerate that has paid more than $10 billion in verdicts. And they're still fighting because they think they can buy a Supreme Court ruling for cheaper than that. And let me tell you what those firms have proven in courtroom after courtroom. They've proven with Monsanto's own documents that Monsanto knew. They had internal emails dating back to the 70s saying that they were concerned about glyphosate's carcinogenic potential. They had employees saying that it was toxic. They ghost wrote studies. They paid experts. They had secret payments to regulators. Go look up the Monsanto papers. Just go look it up. It is a whole catalog of all the internal documents pulled out of these cases. And it reads like a how-to manual for corporate malfeasance. The juries that have heard the evidence have almost without exception returned damages in the high 9 or low 10 figures. $2 billion verdicts, $300 million verdicts. The juries have been outraged. And in the irony of all of it, the argument that the Trump administration is making at the Supreme Court is that those juries should have never been allowed to hear the evidence in the first place. Because the EPA said it was fine. The EPA, who said that glyphosate was originally carcinogenic, and then quietly switched it to say it was safe. You know, we cover stories like this all the time. And lobbyists and corporate media, they fight to squish it. But you can help fight back. And the easiest way that you can help fight back is leave us a comment. Tell us how you think that Make America Healthy Again was just a fake movement. And they're not on the same side as the Trump regime. They haven't been and they never have been. So do me a favor, leave that comment, share this story to make sure stories like this don't die.